Some 4,000 years ago, the very first story ever put to paper, or in this case, cuneiform to tablet, was the Epic of Gilgamesh. Somewhat paraphrased, the very first story ever put down was about a man who eventually would head out west seeking immortality. It would form the basis for what we commonly know as the hero's journey, but not just that, but literature in general, being effectively the first story ever told. You'll find that motif of heading west to seek immortality not just limited to Mesopotamia, but all over the world. Good examples are the soul goes to die and seek its new life in ancient Japan in the West. Obviously, throughout American history and culture, heading west, Western culture in general, heading west tends to be. A motif for new beginnings, finding oneself, seeking journeys. And some 4,000 years later, a 68-year-old man named Burt Munro wouldn't actually head physically west, but head to what was quintessentially known as the West, the American West, to set a land speed record and seek his own version of immortality. In 2005, they would make an incredible movie about this man, starring Sir Anthony Hopkins. Magnolia Pictures would produce The World's Fastest Indian. I'm here with my main man, Dennis, who also shares a love for this movie, to
Hmm.
discuss
Hmm.
Burt Munro, The World's Fastest Indian, the hero's journey, and what makes heroes relatable, not just in motorcycling, but in the world in general. That being said, Rob can't, you can't see him, you can't hear him, but he's there, the man behind the curtain. Hit that music, Rob. And we're back. As always, I'm Kevin. I'm wearing a BrotoGP shirt that you can't get. That's awesome. My man Dennis is here with me. This is one of his favorite movies as well. We've been looking
Hmm.
forward to doing not necessarily just a review of this film, but a general discussion about it. I have obviously my own ideas. Dennis and I are very like minded in a great many ways, and I'm sure his ideas parallel mine in a lot of ways, although less pretentious and less nerdy and probably a little more down to earth. So, right when you think, holy crap, Kevin is all the way up his own ass, Dennis is here to save all of you. So, Rob is laughing. You can't hear him, but it's super distracting to me as I'm talking. So, he's going to move the mic away. There we go. So, before we get started, I would like to thank Writers Law, Rob, lawyer Rob and Cy for sponsoring us as always from the get go. Essentially, if you need personal accident injury, anything going on with your motorcycle, tickets, injury, anything that requires legal representation, Writers Law with a Z.com. Check them out. They're your motorcycle accident injury lawyer. They also are big fans of racing, big fans of motorcycling in general. They sponsor a litany of riders from the lower classes to the higher classes. They are here to for the love of the sport. You know what I mean? So big thanks for them for helping us out. And Dennis has known them for a long time, written for their website as well, and we're always a pleasure to have them. So if you have
Absolutely.
any issues that need legal representation regarding motorcycles, not just in California but nationwide now, hit up Writers Law, writerslaw with a Z.com.
Yep.
Yup. So
Yep.
Dennis, here we are,
Yep. Here we are.
and there's a movie we like.
I love this movie.
It's an amazing film.
Yeah.
Real quick, if you haven't seen it and you don't own it, you can stream it on Amazon. It's like $3 or something. Otherwise, as of November 2019, I don't believe it's on any free streaming services.
I have it
But
like I have a DVD of it. I probably have a Blu-ray of it, and then I also have it in digital, so I could take it with me anywhere I want and just watch it. I probably watch it like once every quarter on average every year.
yeah, I literally rewatched it today to prep for this. And I was like, Dennis, did you watch it? And he's like, no, I watched it like 2 weeks ago and
I know I
like
watch
a
it all
month
the
before
time.
that and like 3 weeks before
Yeah.
that. Um, so one of these things I like about this movie is it's the classic hero's journey, and we're gonna get into the plot in a second, but in an interesting way that there is really no he's not a hero in the traditional sense. He's the protagonist. He's someone that we can all identify with. He's someone that we all can kind of see ourselves in. He's very much a mirror of the everyman, so to speak. That while what he does is somewhat amazing and borderline ridiculous, the fact that he did it isn't based on some special circumstance like your average classic hero's journey. He's not a prince who goes out to find stuff. He's not an heir apparent to something. He's literally just a 68-year-old guy who loves his motorcycle, who has been working on his motorcycle for, 30 years, slowly refining it, and he has this big dream. He has this quest for immortality, so to speak. He says in the film to his young friend, who, small boy that lives next door, that he wants to do something that, the other Jokers haven't done before, something to set himself apart. So what
But
that
that's
is,
what makes him a perfect candidate for a hero, right? Like, I mean, he's so relatable. Like, he's just like what any one of us could be when we turn 68 years old. But he does something incredible by just having that kind of ideal, passion and goal, and he goes after it without any kind of hesitation whatsoever.
with
So it's like a
reckless
walk.
abandon, really.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's like it could be it's both his undoing and the best thing about him. But the thing is that he didn't do anything that none of us cannot do or accomplish. And I think
And I
that's what
think
makes him like an everyman hero, you know?
and that's really the setup for the first act. So it follows kind of your standard, film 3-act arc. And the initial arc is at his home in a small town in New Zealand, which he ends up saying is, the southernmost town in the British Empire. A
Hmm.
lot that
The
they
dude
spend.
lives in a literal man cave, by the way. It's like a shed with his motorcycle, tools, and everything.
Right, he sleeps on a cot. He lives in
Yeah.
a cinder block shed. He
Hmm.
hasn't mowed his lawn in what looks like years, which his neighbor, in the most classic neighbor sense, gives him
Hmm.
crap for. And the son of the neighbor, who is his little best friend, tells him it's lowering the property values. And he has an answer for how to mow the lawn.
Hmm.
Later in the film that we'll cover, that's pretty hilarious. Yes, but the
That's not
first
gonna fly in California right now, by the
no,
way.
no, 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 no. This is definitely a NIMBY situation.
Yeah.
Uh, but what we do with the first act is we set up that this man is relatable. That this is a man with a dream, and we spend it the opening scene, the blown pistons and the broken cranks, sacrifices to the gods of speed,
Hmm.
in his man cave, which essentially is only a garage. He sleeps on a cot, like we said.
Yep.
Um, this is a guy who's so dedicated to his craft. He's forging his own pistons with a mold that he has. Some of the people in the town are having a small fundraiser for him so he can catch the boat, because again, this is in 1968, to sail to Los Angeles to then somehow get himself to the Bonneville Salt Flats to attempt this record. So for the first act of the film, we see some pretty one of the things I think that's odd that they throw out is this old dude. People are always trying to get with him, man. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, I know
he's
for
asked
sure.
to slay on a date, and then she, later famously says, well, he has an episode of angina and is taken away 911 emergency. That hey, dirty old men need love too.
Right.
This is a weird theme that would go on that the ladies love Burt Munro. I don't know how much of that is true and how much of that is just artistic license,
Yeah,
but
I
I
want
have
to
this.
say that that's probably my only kind of nitpick about the movie is the second time that he met a woman. Like I felt like that was like an unnecessary addition to the movie, but I don't really know how true it is or how necessary. But I was like I could have done without the romance with the when he was stateside.
Well, we can talk about that too when we get to that section of the movie, which is kind of more your classic. The call to action has taken place. He sets forth, and now he's on his journey.
Yep.
But I kind of wanted to go over some of the other stuff that happens. They're having a fundraiser for him because he's from a small community. He's just like the lovable old coot. He's like
Mm-hmm.
anyone else in the community who has kind of a wacky dream, and everyone sort of bands together. It's like funny, right? There, he's in this town hall, and they're like reading a poem that a guy wrote about it, and they're having
Yeah.
like a little dance off. He's a terrible dancer, and yeah, the young Kiwi New Zealand chick is showing him how to do the twist, and you're kind of showing that he's like this fun old grandpa, but he's sort of refused to grow old, and that's something that you commonly see in literature, with books about the road, so to
Yeah.
speak. Jack Kerouac's a good example is the focus on youth culture and the tactic refusal to grow old, and I think that Burt Munro, even though they make a significant effort to show that he is old. He has prostate problems. He has heart problems. He's
Yeah.
effectively on nitrates the entire time. In that he is still young at heart. It sounds cliche, but the way the movie produces, excuse me, the way the movie presents it, it's very endearing.
Mm-hmm.
Later, the local biker gang, which I believe was like the Antarctic Angels. If you look at the book, it's kind of the back of their leathers is kind of cool. Challenge him to a race on the beach, and I think
Yeah.
this race on the beach, it sets forth that it sets the precedent that his biggest obstacle in his journey, and this is what to me makes him the most endearing is his own mistakes, not these. There's no magical like monsters in his way, right? In the, from the classic fantasy sense, there's no great antagonist. In fact, there is no antagonist in
Mm-mm.
this movie. The antagonist may be, while in America, his inability to deal with bureaucracy,
Yeah.
but the real antagonist is his own like feeble-mindedness, his own almost blind devotion to his
Yeah. The
that
antagonist is the perils of his journey, but the perils of his journey are there because of his inability to have done something to make sure they didn't happen to begin with.
right. So this scene happens where the a motorcycle gang is challenging him to a race. He's bet $100, which obviously in 1968 is
A
quite a
lot of
large sum of
money.
money
Hmm.
for a New Zealand dude in the southernmost town in the British Empire. And what happens? But he stalls the bike. Pulls a Fabio and he stalls the bike effectively on their homemade grid. And of course, they run out, give him the push, and he gets going. And what does he do? But he straight
Blitzes,
sucks the
man.
paint off these
Hmm.
dudes, like lights them up. He
Right.
gets to the thing, but what happens? Like anything, he needs to make the turn
Yeah, the
around the
turn.
rodale to come back. And what does he do? But he gives it too much gas on his long thing, and he spins and eats crap.
Yep.
They surpass him, they go, and we find out he has the ability to do this dream. He has this crazy 1920 Indian that he's somehow hand cast his pistons, built his own frame,
Hmm.
streamliner, and all this stuff that can go unbelievably fast, and yet he's his own worst enemy. He eats shit, he falls down, he loses money, but he doesn't let him get it down. She asks him how much money you have. She could give him a loan. He's like, well, I got a little bit less than I had, this morning, but he
Yep.
doesn't seem to be bothered by it. I think that really sets the precedent that people are willing to help him, which is a story throughout the a theme throughout the whole story, and yet he still sort of stumbles, but in the most endearing way
Yeah.
possible.
I mean, the very first instance of that was the biker gang, right? Like, I mean, he lost that bet, but like a few minutes later into the film, before he
Hmm.
leaves for his journey, they come right around and wishes him luck and gives him some of that gas money for his
Yeah,
trip.
beer money.
Yeah, exactly. I
Which
mean,
although he doesn't drink, and he says it
yeah.
quite a few times in the movie. It was a weird subtext about no substance abuse. I'm not sure what that
Mm.
was about. He constantly comes into people smoking or drinking and says you shouldn't do that. But hey, whatever.
But that was the first instance of like how, people who when they realize or understand what he's trying to undertake, then he becomes endearing to them, and even his rivals or enemies, as you may call it, he has the ability to turn them around and get behind them to back him up.
And I think this goes to when you read the sort of synopsis of the classic hero's journey of a call to action. In this case, wanting to set the world speed record, going out into the world. One of the parts of the classic hero's journey that is often overlooked, but I think this sets the precedent for, is the return home with new knowledge.
Mm.
Now, the film doesn't go into that especially, but what it does do is lay the tactic groundwork that the community in fact wants him to accomplish this, even though he later finds out most of the community thinks he can't, but they're
Yeah.
hoping maybe he can. And then he would return home, and the return home with knowledge, the return home from the journey a changed person, is such an integral part of like the classic literary protagonist journey. And I think while we don't cover that return home particularly in depth in the film, because it's not really
Mm-mm.
relevant, they're setting the scope that that is part of this. That
Right.
while they don't necessarily think he can do it, like most journeys, you can't slay the dragon, Gilgamesh can't go west and defeat the demon and then find, the source of immortality for his friend. But you can support someone in these attempts to do it, because most people, we hear this all the time in real life, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life, and blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? The system isn't set up for everyone to do what they love all the time. It doesn't really work that way, right?
Mm.
Not everyone gets a chance to do this for what, it sucks, but it's a part of the reality right now. But what you can do is support people that you believe in, and then take a small part of that for yourself. Live vicariously through your community. I've had personal experience with this. When I was traveling in West Africa, someone was able to do the Hajj from a small village, and since you're supposed to do the Hajj if you can, but obviously being from a remote West Africa, it's not really realistic. this one person did it and then carried a box full of fingernail clippings, hair strands, whatever, knickknacks, and brought it with him to represent the community. And I know it sounds kind of weird, but the idea that one person as a protagonist can represent the community along this journey, I think, is important. And they really, really set this out in the beginning of the film,
Right.
which is effectively the first act, establishing the character narrative that he is a lovable man who probably gets it in his own way as much as he propels himself, and that while his dream may seem absurd or unrealistic to some, they support him in spite of that.
Yeah, so you know where he comes from before he goes on to this journey, you know?
Right, exactly. So, he ends up creating the. Oh, there's a mosquito in here. Oh, I got it. Boom.
Jeez.
Um, for those of you not on the video, I just caught a mosquito in midair, like Daniel-san style, Karate Kid. Got him. But so yeah, so we set the narrative where he's from, that he's an important member of his community, and now he has this call to action, this call to adventure, and he's going to set forth out into the world, and in a very classic literary sense, literally set sail. He books passage on a freighter, and he or
Hmm.
he pays his way by being the ship's cook, despite not being a good cook at all, and everyone basically needed to douse all their food in ketchup or whatever the entire time. But he really, it truly is marking the second act of setting sail to this new adventure, to a new land. Like I said, not physically the direction west, because obviously in New Zealand he's heading northeast, but to the west. And I think that's an important distinction, because the west in so much of literature represents the quest for immortality or the direction out into the unknown or going to find yourself. We see this in most of American history. you know, Forget sort of the parallels of the socio-political issues with the fact that there were already people there. I'm talking about kind of the Western mythos, that heading west, heading out to the west is where you go to find yourself, where you go to achieve your dreams. And I think that, they took a very classically American road story aspect to this movie by spending most of the second act with him on the road.
When he arrived to the port, by the way, so speaking of when I was talking about how the biker gang kind of came around and made
Mm-hmm.
sure to see him off, I thought that was a really really cool moment. And then my next favorite moment after that was actually at the port, when he was being interviewed by the authorities as to what he was doing there.
Right.
And then when they realized who they were dealing with, not necessarily like the kind of person, but what he was looking to do, and
Mm-hmm.
considering where he came from, I thought that was a very very cool gesture too. So if for any of our listeners or viewers gonna watch, just keep an eye out for that scene because I thought that was a very cool scene as well at the port.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, because that scene is effectively the introduction of the secondary antagonist.
Hmm.
He's his own antagonist through his sort of mistakes, lack of forward thinking, or his tunnel focus on the bike as opposed to the logistics of doing the race and the time trial itself. Is that I see his first encounter with the bureaucracy, or the procedural, if you will, like the idea that procedure, following the rules, is his other antagonist. I think Burt Munro's whole character is not following the rules, flaunting the rules in a very endearing way, not in a rebel without a cause, or not in a, the wild one, what are you rebelling against, what do you got? What another,
Right.
classic American
Yeah.
film, but in the sense that he simply doesn't pay attention to that because it's not relevant to being able to make a motorcycle go fast and experience it. It ends up being incredibly relevant to that, and I think they're laying the groundwork in that particular scene. Those port officers and custom controls end up being supportive of him, but you see their initial distrust.
Hmm.
He gets a secondary interview.
Yep.
They say your answers were strange, but they weren't strange. The only thing that made them strange, they were perfectly honest and forthright answers. I'm here to
Right.
set a land speed record, and I love the
Yeah.
way that Sir Anthony Hopkins keeps saying, "I'm here to set a land speed record." Like, just the enunciation is
Yeah.
part of it. He does such a good job of creating a character out of what's effectively just a normal dude.
Yeah.
But you see that his inability to understand the bureaucracy or procedure, I think is a better way to put it, becomes a part of his becomes his biggest obstacle, and I think this is a part of it. Procedural lack of adherence to procedure and getting around that. And I couldn't think of anything more like perfect for a motorcycle film at heart than not wanting to deal with procedure, not wanting to deal with bureaucracy, not wanting to deal with assumptions of life and what you should be doing. Um,
I
so
never
yeah,
really
that's
thought of it that way because I almost thought that his faults were just he just came from I don't know, an environment where things shouldn't have to be that difficult. Because what he's seeking to do is so simple that to be able to accomplish that, even if in another side of the world, it shouldn't be as difficult as he's having to find out once he got stateside.
But isn't that all of us? Right? That's all.
Yeah,
That's everyone. Things shouldn't have to be this fucking
yeah,
difficult. Sorry, I haven't
exactly.
sworn once yet. It's the first time. We're gonna demonetize us on YouTube. But things shouldn't have to be that difficult. And I think that's what makes it so interesting. Is that like who among us hasn't dealt with the damn procedure, the name,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
faceless bureaucracy, where those guys are just doing their job. They weren't doing anything wrong. They're just saying, "Hey, man, this guy's got weird answers to these questions that we're assigned to ask."
Yep.
You know what I mean? And you see that the following scene, he goes to not the following scene, but 2 or 3 scenes later, he goes to pick up that bike from the port, and what's
Hmm.
happened, but it's been damaged. And he asked the guy, "What am I going to do?" And or it's been damaged. You know, they dropped 11 tons of fertilizer on the crate. It was on its side. It's totally smashed. And he says, the port authority, "You should sue the shipping company." And he says, "Who? I'm not going to waste my time or my life with suing someone." And what does he do? He just gets everyone around him. "Hey, man, help me flip this crate. Let's just see what's going on." Forget
Right.
procedure, forget retribution, forget all of the what you should do. Let's just flip this thing over and see. And what happens? It's perfect.
Hmm.
Initially, when I watched the movie, I was like, wow, why'd they make such a big deal out of this scene that his thing got. Remember, because they show when it's being loaded, it gets dropped on its side. It's a
Right.
quick
Right.
little scene. And then later it's damaged and they have the music build, and you think, oh my God, here's the first obstacle. His bike is jacked up. He's got to fix the
Hmm.
bike. He's got no car, no place to work on anything. What's he going to do? And it's perfect. But you find out it's perfect seconds after he says, I don't have time or the effort or the patience to sue someone. I'm not here for that. And I think that was another example of not following like common procedure, common thought.
Yeah.
I'm just here to make this bike go fast, Ricky Bobby style. I'm here to go fast, baby. You know what I mean? Um, and I love that scene for it. But you
Also,
have
the tons
another,
of fertilizer that fell on it is probably like what do you call this? Almost like a symbolism of
yeah,
his dream being
it's
shat on.
yeah, and not putting up with shit.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't hope we don't
Yeah.
get demonetized for that one because that's a legitimate answer to
Exactly.
Dennis's
Yeah.
thing. But if you're on iTunes, I can swear all I want. It's all good, dog. So I think that's a good scene that really goes to show it. We set the precedent that now what he's going to happen is this journey is going to be twofold. He's going to set out west, so to speak, on the American road, the most classic, road trip on the road. Go to find myself, sweeping shots of the American West, all of those things, and what he's going to do along this, where we've set that the journey is going to be not understanding procedure or not understanding modernity, civilization, not understanding that as civilization grows in complexity, all of our answers and ability to accomplish anything grow in complexity. And you see this when he doesn't understand how a cab works.
Hmm.
Right? And he has a surly cab driver who doesn't open the door for him, who doesn't put his bags in the back. And what does he mumble to himself under his breath? Wouldn't want to grow old in this country.
Oof.
Scathing indictment that I could really, really, really go on a tangent, but I'm not going to because Rob will melandry me from his mystery curtain that you can't see.
He'll jump
Um,
right out, but from behind
jump,
Kevin. Watch.
jump right out from behind. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. But the idea that we've already set the precedent. He doesn't understand this level of modernity. He doesn't understand the level of procedure, and that situation in the cab driver, where to take me? Hollywood. Where in Hollywood? The cab driver is nothing but combative the entire time, simply because he's giving straightforward answers.
Hmm.
And but what we do see is now that we've established that the two antagonists are him and sort of the almost emotionless, uh, so by default negative procedure, he now is going to go out on his classic journey. And what does he encounter but a series of quote unquote magical beings that you see, right? And it's a little on
That's
the
true.
nose. He meets a trans woman who is the clerk at an office, excuse me, at the motel that he stays at. Is the first one, and what do we see? But tactic acceptance of her and who she is, and um, no judgment or sort of withdrawal whatsoever. Just you
Hmm.
are a person, and I'm kind, and you're kind. And the
Right.
answer to his inability to deal with procedure and modernity is kindness.
Yeah.
Is implicit kindness without response. But so what he interacts with these quote unquote magical creatures, which is the sort of literary term, or the hero's journey, magical people that help him discover how to navigate the new land, is each one of these people he's given a gift, he gains a gift, and it's through their just implicit act or explicit, excuse me, acts of kindness to him directly. And that's a theme that you'll see across a couple more. So he meets this woman. Her name is Tina. She's obviously clearly in transition from male to female, at least in how she presents herself in the world. And he goes out with her, not in a romantic sense, but she takes him to breakfast. And what does he see but the first menu with pictures he's ever seen? Right.
I
So he
remember,
doesn't
yeah.
know he doesn't know how he wants his eggs cooked, which is this sort of weirdly innocent thing. Like, how does this grown man not know? He's sort of these
Yeah.
pictures are freaking him out. The modern world is kind of strange. He's very analog still. His bike is as analog as it gets, and Tina is the first one that helps him get his bike from customs. So through the kind of random acts of kindness, she helps him develop, or helps him deal with talking to the customs officers over the phone, finds out where it is in Long Beach, helps him get there, and then helps him go find a car
Hmm.
because he needs a car to get himself and his bike and trailer to Utah. So you see, Tina is the first of a series of like quote unquote
Hmm.
magical beings or creatures, whatever you want to call it, that helps him, and she sets the stage that being a being kind for the sake of it is the answer to this sort of faceless, nameless, emotionless, procedural civilization that we're
I like
that
that. I
sort of
never
we're
really thought
currently.
about it that, but it's true. He does encounter a multitude of these characters, and there really are characters. But yeah, in the sense of the hero's journey, you could describe them as magical beings because it's almost like without them, he really couldn't have he couldn't have finished his journey.
Right, and there was a couple, and in getting ready for this sort of analysis slash discussion, I had read some reviews, and some people initially didn't like this. That they felt that the Tina character was thrown in, and people get weirdly, oh, it's PC culture, blah 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 blah. But there's actually an illusion that it's not the case. I don't know if Tina is an actual
Right,
like
based in real life kind of
based
thing.
in her life, or if she's
Yeah.
entirely fictionalized. But I do know that on the boat, there's an interesting little thing thrown out that's only caught by people who are maybe fans of old film or foreign film, is which the movie they're watching after he makes all the shitty food for the sailors is a movie called Broken Barriers, which is a movie that was created or that was filmed, directed, and released originally in New Zealand about an interracial couple, a
Oh,
man and a woman, that have barriers where they fall in love, then their families tear them apart. He rejects her, and then later they fall back. And this is obviously a movie made in early 1950s New Zealand. New Zealand is a pretty damn progressive place, and they're way ahead of the curve in many senses. So I don't think it's odd at all that Burt would be even at his. No one's dropping OK Boomer on him. He's from yeah, exactly. He's from New Zealand at a time which was far more progressive and ahead of the schedule in terms of acceptance of people. And I think it was an important addition to the film as an idea that kindness and forthrightness is what's going to circumvent all of these weird roles that this, as I keep saying, procedural society is putting us in place. So for me, they threw that out there with The Broken Barrier. If you get a chance to watch it, it's not bad. You can probably find it on a Criterion Collection, a separate movie. But if you're into like 1950s New Zealand black and white film.
no, like I said, I've watched this movie so many times I would have never paid attention to that little tidbit right there as far as that movie's concerned during the boat scene.
Luckily,
Yeah.
you know me, and I'm a nerd for this kind of stuff.
Yes, you are.
Yes, I am.
Yes, yeah. Tomorrow is a holiday, so I'm off. I may just have to look up
You
that
may
movie.
have to look it up. Right. It's not a holiday for me. I just have to go to work because my boss is a bitch. Um, so, speaking of the characters, Tina helps him navigate the initial trials and tribulations of this procedural society. And then what does he do? He needs to get a vehicle. He's
Transport, yeah.
on the road. He's driving, and what happens? But his car breaks down.
Hmm.
And one of the things that they talk about throughout this movie is his age and its effect on his body. And I think for a lot of people, it's actually a pretty important thing to talk about. But he has an attack of angina. At one point in New Zealand, the doctor tells him, like, I think your motorcycle riding days are over. And,
Yeah.
like, how many of us have been told by a doctor, like, you can no longer do this thing? We can no longer do this thing that makes us who we are, or is at least so important to our self identity that to not do it would be an acceptance of
Hmm.
not being at all.
Throwing in the
Um,
white flag, basically.
yeah, exactly. It would be to abandon who we are for the sake of what we are, which I think is not good. But what we have is he encounters his car breaks down because the trailer that he builds in a mechanic shop at 3 a.m. falls apart because it's a terrible trailer. So he has the answer to his problem: how do I get my bike to Utah? And then he's also the creation of the problem, which is he didn't build a very good trailer. The tire falls off, and then what happens? But sort of a very on the nose American West magical being, so to speak, but a straight up like Native American dude. And I
Hmm.
mean like I don't want to say caricature because he's portrayed in a very positive light, but it's
Yeah.
clearly like an homage to like this is his name's Jake, but he is a very old, very weathered, very double like not braided Native American who gets him back to a campsite, puts him up, and this is another person who at this time period in the United States is the downtrodden. He's a Native American. Traditionally in America, the Native American communities tend to represent the very bottom of the economic scale for obviously larger reasons we don't need to go into now. Um, Nature reservations, cultural history, all of those things, and he's out there, but he's staying with them. Treating he reacts no differently to these people's states, to their economic situation, whatever. And what does this guy do? But Bert has a prostate problem. He has an issue
Hmm.
peeing, like a lot of a great many grown men, because just so you know, your urinary tract goes directly under your prostate. And as you get old, your prostate enlarges. It pushes on the urinary tract. Your bladder's back here. Your fucking dong is out here. It makes it really hard to get the pee from the bladder to the dong. You would
Thanks for the
think
literal imagery, Kevin.
that the balls are where the pee is stored, which is true, but it's filtered in the bladder and then passes to the dong. If you had any actual biological questions for the BrotoGP Army on this very weird inside joke. So he has that. But what is the answer for that? He gives him later a bag of dried dog balls,
Ground up.
ground up. Well, of
Ground
course,
up,
you
yeah.
wouldn't eat them whole. We're not
No, no.
savages.
Goes down
Yeah,
easily when it's ground up.
goes down. Yeah, it's
Ask me how I
exactly.
know.
Yeah, exactly. So the second of his sort of magical beings that he runs into is Jacob, unnamed tribe Native American who saves him, helps him, get back
Hmm.
on the road, which they affix a large stick as the wheel, which is just a weird scene. It's like a post, and I kept thinking to myself, isn't that thing going to catch on fire from the friction? You know. So, and that brings us to another scene along the journey where Dennis thinks is seems superfluous, and I sort of agree. Um, it lays out the point that this is now the second time he's mentioned his deceased twin brother who died tragically in what seems like a very senseless act, which is just his
Hmm.
father was cutting down a tree. The tree fell a weird way, got caught, and when trying to unloosen it, it fell and killed his twin brother at a very young age, which obviously is somewhat traumatic. And they allude to that as sort of being the trauma and the reason for his desire to do these sort of amazing things, or maybe push the boundaries of what he could do as sort of a experience life for the both of them, twin with his twin brother, because They didn't just say brother; it's twin. The idea that it's the twin brother, I think, makes sense. And this is an idea that's fleshed out even more in Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, to a dev who perished in a tragic machete fight accident. Um,
I haven't actually seen that movie,
you
but
haven't
now
seen Walk
with
Hard?
the
Oh yeah,
tragic machete fight
it
incident, I
was
might
an
have to also
accidental,
watch that.
tragic machete fight accident. Yeah, he got cut in half real good. That's a quote. Oh, Dewey, I cut in half real good. Um, yeah. So, but he meets along the way. He just literally shows up at a house, which out in the American West, you show up randomly people's houses, just banging on their door. You might get a face full. You know what
Uh-huh.
I mean? A buckshot if they're nice, and slug if they're a little bit less than nice. And he meets a woman, and this is now technically the third, because Tina was trying to get him to come home to her house, but he makes reference to, like, come on, man, you're a dude. But this lady who he runs into ends up obviously wanting a piece of him too. And this was a little bit of an odd scene, and Dennis had brought up that he thought that it was unnecessary. I just wanted to hear your opinion on why you thought that.
I don't know. I couldn't really see any importance from it. I felt like, I mean, on the technical side of movie making, I felt like it was just there for the runtime. Meaning that
Hmm.
kind of like 90-minute runtime. But I just, even to this day, as many times I've watched it, I feel like I really could do without that scene. After all,
It's weird because the movie's 2 hours and 7 minutes, the runtime, so exclude
right?
the
So,
credits. Doesn't really need it. There's a scene where he wakes up in the night with her,
hmm,
and there's kind of an interesting blue light on him, and he's thinking about his brother, which he says later. And I felt like there was something more there. Of the whole movie, it's probably, in my opinion, the only scene that seems out of place.
yeah,
In fact, when people talked about, oh, the Tina aspect seems really forced, that actually felt super organic to me, because he's
yep,
in Sunset Boulevard, Hollywood, Holly weird, literally. You know what I mean? My sister lives in Hollywood. My sister has Hollywood tatted down her side. She
that's
is
she.
Hollywood. Yeah, exactly. She is Hollywood. It's tatted.
Wow.
Um, and Hollywood's a weird place, man. It certainly was, I think, in 1968. Super weird. So I thought that was organic. This scene definitely felt tacked on. And I'm not sure what they were attempting to convey with it outside of runtime. But it seems odd because the runtime isn't really
Yeah.
important here. The movie would have been an hour and 50 minutes instead for this
Yeah.
10-minute
So,
scene.
I mean, I'll keep watching. When I figure it out, we'll make a part two of this video.
I mean, maybe it's just to show that he fucking was a lady killer. He's a
Yeah.
68-year-old version of Rob. He's
Well,
just
that.
slaying left or right.
But that being said, I thought that the first woman, I mean, the first in the beginning,
Hmm.
showing his relationship with the banker. I mean, that was a perfect illustration of his charisma already. So I didn't find it any. I didn't. I certainly didn't think, oh, are they gonna show how charismatic he is midway through the movie? No, I was like, I thought that was already settled at the
Right, it
beginning.
was an established portion, and
Yeah.
and this had happened before. He when he's applying for a loan to mortgage his house, and then he
Yeah.
just tells the loan officer, like, I don't even know if I'm going to be alive much longer, and he's just like, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that. Like they sort of
Yeah.
established that he's charismatic in a
Yeah.
very natural way. So it definitely seemed a
Yeah.
bit tacked on, and she didn't really perform the, like, magical bean aspect. He learned
Mm-mm.
nothing from her. She didn't give him new information. She helped him fix the trailer,
The trailer, yeah. I think I
but
was looking for welding equipment or something, which she just happened to have.
right.
But then
You
there
know,
was like
there's
no scene of that.
there's I feel as though the two things happen in this scene that I think they could have done better. I understand what they were going with a little bit. One, she brings him to the grave of her late husband, who
Yeah.
had died 12 years earlier, and he gives kind of this weirdly little waxing poetic about, I think, that, like, a man is it's good. That part is good. A man is like a blade of grass. He grows in the spring, he grows tall and proud, and then in the summer he's at his full robustness. He sways in the wind where the world takes him, and then in the fall he withers and he dies, never to come back. And he says he doesn't really believe anything else happens. So he sort of is saying that he accepts death as a natural part of life, a natural culmination of life. He doesn't fear it or seem bothered by it. um which is, I think, an important thing to bring up for someone who's attempting to go 200 miles an hour on a motorcycle
Yeah.
that doesn't have a chute, doesn't have a flame suit. Like he's expressing that, and then he thinks about his brother in the middle of the night. So I think there's a scene. The scene is designed to set up to talk about his relationship with death. It's the only scene in the film that
yeah, and
it
it
doesn't
feels a
hit.
little bit like an afterthought that it probably
Yes.
came towards the end of shooting.
Right. Or in editing process, they said, we need to some kind of explanation of this because who knows what was on the editing room floor.
Yeah.
But to continue the journey aspect of the plot, he gets the car fixed, the trailer fixed, and he heads out. There's a lot of sweeping versions of Utah, and there's a great scene. He picks up a guy who's I'm not sure if he's in the Army or the Marines.
Coming back from service, basically.
Coming back from service, he's on a 2-week leave from Vietnam,
Yep.
and it follows that same thing, and he's talking about war, and they're talking about Agent Orange, and they're driving down, the vastness of the American kind of wasteland, so to
Hmm.
speak, the West, the big sky country, and what are they doing? They're looking at the signs that are up, and they're reading them to each other, about the Burma shave, all the weird little slogans back in the day, and they're going over the signs they see, and it's a very classically American road trip scene where it's shot through the windshield, and it's an old guy and a young guy just sharing the experience of being on the road. This transitional time, they're both going to have major life events that could, that are, well, not in the same level of danger. And I don't think they're meaning to imply that because one's obviously returning to Vietnam,
Yeah.
and then Burt is going to do attempt. It's this lull period of just fun and acceptance of the goofiness of everyday life before they go do this dangerous thing.
Before they kind of embark on something historical, basically.
Yes, correct,
Yeah.
correct. It's that lull, but the calm before the storm, before the realness hits. And I actually
Yeah.
really liked that scene. Um, that guy doesn't come across as any kind of. It's not a magical being. It's just a character study, and it just
Yeah.
goes on to show that that portion of it. But it kind of ends the road trip, American road, American West aspect, and you get to sort of the final plot, the final
Hmm.
act of the plot. Act 3, which is the attempt,
Yep.
which is the land speed record. And this brings us to Dennis's favorite scene in the movie. And I just kind of wanted Dennis to kind of explain about it, what he likes. So he gets to Bonneville, he meets some guys, he's on the salt flats. He gives kind of this rousing speech about this is the place, that he's going to try this. He's thought about this for 25, 30 years. Like his whole
Yeah.
life's been about this moment. And then he realizes that he needed to register. He
Yeah.
needed to have safety equipment. He comes face to face with the true antagonist of the film, which is like the procedural nature of modern civilization. He comes face to face with his entire dream, which he's built this bike himself. He's got himself to this place halfway around the world with no money, ailing health, super old. How is he going to do this? He's clawed tooth and nail to get him to the place where he could do it. He says it, flat sand, no soft spots, no wind. It's the perfect week. It's going to be an epic week for the Bonneville Salt Flats. And what is his biggest obstacle? The fact that he didn't register.
Yeah. Not having the foresight to have done what you were supposed to do is, again, it's like a recurring theme throughout the movie, right? And this is
Mhm.
like the final symbolism of that. So.
Right. So we're gonna do this in a little reverse. There's a scene that's one of my favorite, probably my favorite scene in the movie that most powerfully exemplifies that. But what we're gonna say is he doesn't have his registration, right? Closed a month ago. He doesn't have any safety equipment. The bike is damn near falling apart. He doesn't even have. He has tires that he basically cut with a knife
Yep.
smooth,
To turn
you
him into
know,
slicks.
to
And he was
turn him
putting
slick.
like, what do you call them? Like those
He
shoe
was
things
putting
to.
shoe polish to
Yeah.
hide the cracks. So
Exactly.
so he doesn't have anything that any rational person would expect that you need to do this. But the movie isn't about being irrational. The movie is
Hmm.
about irrationally following dreams.
Hmm.
And basically, after all is said and done, he is effectively allowed a test run.
Yep.
He had to prove that A, he's not like gonna die, and B, that the bike is mechanically up to snuff to be allowed to go onto the 8 mile course and actually make a run at his speed record. And they think the bike probably won't even do 80, and yet.
Yep. Absolutely. So it's my favorite scene for a couple of reasons. One is it was nicely shot when in slow motion you could see Bird putting on his helmet, and just the look on his face is literally the culmination of the whole journey of what he's been thinking about, dreaming about doing, and he's about to do it. And then when he finally does the run, being followed by the officials and whatnot, and he leaves them just at his wake, just the look of astonishment from them is almost like this is the third act, mind you, right? And
Mhm.
that's the first time that you realize, and the characters realize this guy is for real. Like we
He's
talk about,
legit.
like yeah, we talk about like magical creatures and whatnot, and maybe serendipitous things happening or lucky things happening to him, and yet you don't really know what he's gonna do or what he could do. And this is the first time that he actually showcases it, and he just blows everybody away. And I thought that was very, very well done. Obviously, credit to the actors to show just like how, you know, showing how amazed they are as well. Like it resonated with me when I knew he was gonna do it. I'm like an audience member watching the movie. I knew what's gonna happen, but just by seeing their reaction, I can't help but also feel at awe witnessing it.
Right, you know he's gonna do it. The
Yeah.
title of the movie
Yep.
tells you the end.
Yeah.
The world's fastest Indian, right? It
Hmm.
literally tells you. So this is kind of one of those movies where you know the outcome. He's gonna do it, but you're like, wow, how could he do it?
Hmm.
They set up all these obstacles. And you know what I really liked about that scene, Dennis? Because I asked you what was your favorite scene before I rewatched it, so I could really was they're 80, they're 90, they're
Hmm.
95, they're pacing him in their cars, right?
Right.
And then he hits that top gear, he lets it, he opens it up, and he just motors
Right.
past them. I mean,
Hmm.
like they're standing still. And credit to the actors here. The pure joy in
Hmm.
those dudes' faces was
Yep.
just the kind of joy that it's funny, man. We've talked about this about like why do you race? Because that sense of community. I've talked with Rob about this on other episodes. Do track days, that weird sense, you crash your bike and everyone, people you don't even know are giving you shocks and
Yep.
letting you borrow fucking calipers or whatever, right? Just to
Yep.
get that bike on the track. Like, even like that's the most important thing in the world, even though it's really not. But in a sense, it is.
Yeah. Because
And
at that moment in time, you're brought together.
they don't know this guy from a hole in the wall. They've known him for a day.
Yep.
All they know about this guy is this guy just wants to do this. But when they see that he is for real,
Hmm.
there's a level of joy and excitement. They are so stoked.
Yep.
These are not people in competition with each other, which is something that I feel our society does to us so much, from our economic system to the way we view things to pitting to political sides. Everything in so much of Western, but especially American culture, many times is the pitting of us against each other, the keeping up with the Joneses. And
Yep.
in this scene, what you have is no one is in competition with Burt, and he's not in competition with them. They
Hmm.
want him to succeed because he represents them. And
Hmm.
they are him. Like it's that they want him to succeed. They're at one point they're gonna help him cheat. Remember, they're just gonna push him out
Yeah.
there. Fuck him,
I know.
send him out there, right there. And he stalls the bike, and they're like, "What are you doing, man?" And
Yeah.
it's his pure tenacity that lets him get this test run.
Yep. Yeah.
But what really lets him get this test run is he encounters his final magical being, so to speak, a person that enables him that whose magic, so to speak, is kindness and genuineness, but whose kindness and genuineness allows him to navigate this procedural society that we're talking about. So I don't remember the guy's name offhand, but he meets a guy from San Jose. He's a car driver. He's got his own rig. It's quite elaborate. It's a nice big streamliner. It's great. And he meets this guy, and this guy is kind and genuine and wants to help. And this guy has the connections that he can use to navigate this procedural society we're talking about to let Burt get his thing. So the final sort of magical being that he reaches, as they've been setting this up all along,
Jim
slowly but
Moffat,
sure.
by the way.
Jim, there you go, from San
Jim
Jose
Moffat
though, man,
from
Bay
San Jose.
Area,
I know.
from
I
the
know. I
Yay,
love it.
love
Exactly.
it, right? And he negotiates his ability to get this test run. And he never thinks he can do it. He's constantly talking to tech inspection. He's
Yeah.
talking, because we're talking about Bert's bike has no brakes.
Mm-hmm.
It's got no parachute. He's got no fire extinguisher system. He has no fire suit. He doesn't have a full face helmet.
No, he's just a bell bucket helmet.
It's literally a bucket helmet with like welding goggles,
Yep.
and it's just the absurdity that he would even be attempting this is hilarious, and we think it's funny, but
Yeah.
to Bert it's deadly serious, and he's willing to put his everything on the line. In this day and age, it's very hard for a lot of grown men to ask for help. Asking for help is not something that traditional Western masculinity is something that's given approval. You see this in a lot of ways. Men, in many ways, suffer from mental health issues. In a quieter situation, they seek therapy less. Their rates of violent suicide are higher. All these things. I'm not trying to go on depressed tangent, but what I'm trying to say is that in many cases, the ability for males to ask for help is frowned upon, and in many cases by other males. It's an admission of weakness. It's an admission of vulnerability, and I
Mm-hmm.
think the vulnerability aspect is what is the key to Bert. And to go on that, my favorite scene in this movie is at tech inspection. They tell him, this is pre Dennis's favorite scene, so we're moving back one scene.
Yep.
They tell him you got to go over to registration, and registration's like, "What's your number?" And he's like, 35. That's just the number he paid on his bike, right? It's like
Exactly.
his own number. He just like wrote, yeah, whatever.
Racing number, pretty
It's
much. Yeah.
my racing number. It's on the side of the bike. What are you talking about? And they tell him, "Hey, man, like it was a month ago it closed." And then there's a scene where I thought I could just show up and Mason. He says, "You thought wrong." And they go through all these. Hey, it's the rules. We can't help you. You didn't
Yeah.
follow procedure. And he begins to ramble where he has an admission it's his own fault.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know. I'm from halfway around the world. I'm from this little nowhere town. I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
just an old man. And there's this total vulnerability that Anthony Hopkins acts so well. You know, we're used to Anthony Hopkins as like Hannibal Lecter, right? And all these other characters they're so expressive in like a
Yeah.
visceral sense. But this scene is the sadness and the almost defeat that goes over him, and the sort of rambling like you expect, like a frustrated, not sure what's going on, clearly out of date, the world is kind of passing him by old man. And it's kind of heart-wrenching, at least for me, but in the best way, because what it really does is point specifically to the biggest obstacle for him, but also his most endearing quality is
Yep.
his vulnerability as a man.
Yep.
And for me, that was, of all the sort of like I don't want to talk shit about like and bring in like GP and Mark Marquez and all that, but we've talked very much about some of our problems with Marquez, or who as of right now is the reigning 5-time champion, is that the lack of vulnerability, the lack of being brought down and then coming back up, or relatability.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are very flawed. The reason most people root for the underdog in most sports is it's a reflection of their own inadequacies and desire to rise above those inadequacies and do special things.
Right.
So I think that they're pushing Burt as an exceedingly vulnerable man, and who is trying to excel at like maybe the most masculine thing in a traditional sense you could have. Big roaring engines, no fucking headers, or excuse me, no mufflers, straight headers, roaring engines, strap on the thing, 200 miles an hour. And yet we have this guy who is attempting to be the best and succeeds at
Yep.
the quintessentially manly thing, especially in the 60s when having a car. That time we're talking about Easy Rider came out in 69, I can't remember. So, but we're talking about the time period where men and vehicles hand in hand. That's how you got a lady. That's how you got a chick, right? That's
Yeah.
all of those things. You think back to James Dean movies and all of that. And this is a time period where your maleness was very much connected to how you interacted with motorsport in some way, or motors, at least in popular culture by
Yeah.
far. And yet we have this guy who is vulnerable as all hell, even though he's going to do like the most badass version of that, which is do it without any safety equipment.
Right. And when he
Please.
finally did his run, That sequence actually stopped being about Bert and about the world around him. I thought it was
Hmm.
really like it was perfectly shot that they didn't really focus too much on him doing his run. Not that they could do much with it because it's just him going balls out. But it was more like cutting back and forth between all the people watching
Hmm.
or do his run. Like again, credit to the actors, right? They really sold that very well. And by the time that he finally clicked the speed record, man, I was right there with them as far as like being blown away.
Right, because that was that whole point, right?
Yep.
Was if you talk about the rallying against the procedural society that we're creating, please, for the love of God, let me just feel real life for a
Yep.
minute. Let me go do this. Yes, I don't have all the safety equipment. I don't have parachute. I don't have exactly the helmet you need or the fire suit that you need. I don't have exactly all of the regulations. Yo, man, let me be me. He says it's
Exactly.
my life. Let
Mm-hmm.
me do what I think this is a question that so many motorcyclists get asked. All of us as motorcyclists have had that person when you say you ride, they tell you about their friend that fucking died or their
Exactly.
friend that broke
First
his
thing.
leg. The
Yeah.
first thing they want to talk about is how stupid it is. And you're
Yep.
like, "Yo, man, this is my life. This is my dream.
Yep.
Just let me be me. It's not involving you." And that's and I really really love that they use the vulnerability of please just let me be the badass I want to be. And I feel like that is inherent to so many people in our, and I'm not saying it's inherent to maleness. There's plenty of
Right.
women and
No. Yeah.
everyone along the spectrum that just wants to be, allow me to do the things that I want to do. It
Right.
doesn't impact you. Don't legislate out risk to the point that why am I here?
Right. And it's funny because you watch him do that, which he's always been wanting, and what does he do? He does something magical after all.
Right. He there, and that's what you said. The scene, it's interesting because how do you make going in a straight line interesting? Like we've all seen those videos of the cars that go 500 or whatever, right? You
Yep.
see these videos and they look like they're going so slow because Bonneville has no point of reference. There's no parallax, so you
Right.
just see this thing and the camera's tracing it from a long distance, and it doesn't look like it's going fast. So we have this scene where we have to show drama in someone going straight.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's
so
very
they do
fast.
it by having the timekeeper call the times at every mile, and how like you're building the tension. But I
Yeah.
think in mile 4, 5, and 6, he barely changes, right? Like the law of diminishing returns. He hits 190, then it's like 193, then 194, and you're wondering if he's going to hit the 200.
Yep.
And the way the actors do it, sell the tension to me is that, like you said, that's just it's the crux, right? It's the climax
Yep.
of the film, so to speak, is that he does do it. And I'm sticking my dirty ass feet like in the film, right in the camera too. Rob will edit that out, just be blurred. Yeah, I think that's a great scene. They're able to show the tension of that, you know, totally. And the
Yep.
one thing, speaking of safety, speaking of worry, the one thing that they sort of allude to is that his bike has a strong wobble. I don't mean allude to it. They outright say it, and he has
Yep.
to work around having a speed wobble because, as he explains in a pretty fun scene with Cigar,
The
that the
cigar,
center of
toothpick.
pressure is off from the center of gravity on the bike, so he gets an inherent speed wobble. And the way that he stops the wobble is by lifting himself out of the seat a little bit to change and if Rob was actually on this episode, he could probably take the physics of whether that was true or not, about whether you want the pressure. He's giving me a big thumbs up. So you do want your center of pressure behind your center of gravity, so you have a stable in two-wheel directions. And the way that his streamliner is built, because he just made it himself, is that it
Yep.
ends up causing the center of pressure to be in front, and so he lifts his head up to change the center of pressure. Um, and after he makes his run, he passes the record, which in real life, the official record's like 184 miles an hour, and the unofficial record is over 200. And in the movie, they say it's, I think, 201 and change. Don't quote me on that, but it's plus 200. And then what does he do to slow himself down and keep the wobble start? He lifts himself up, his goggles fall off, and then he crashes.
Mm-hmm.
Crashes without result. He's not injured. He has a big ass burn on his leg because he wasn't willing to put the asbestos
Asbestos lining.
on,
Yeah.
lining on his pants, because then he didn't fit.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the kind of forward thinking he had, was I'm going to make this streamliner so small that anything other than a pair of slacks I can't wear.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of the final example of that, he's his lack of forward thinking, in some sense his own worst enemy. He's got a big giant burned on scar, but also, and it's not super alluded to, but one of the things is you come back from the hero's journey changed, and you have evidence of that. And what does he have but a gigantic scar on his leg that is now evidence of this land speed record, but that he does return to Bonneville, I believe, 9 more times.
Yeah.
So he has learned his lesson. He comes back changed, and now he masterfully navigates this procedural world to set numerous records that I believe, and you could quote me if I'm wrong here, at least the movie says it still stands to this day. That
Yep.
was in 2005. I don't know. I know that they had a 50th anniversary where like his nephew or something tried to break the record on a newer Indian. And I'm not exactly sure about that. It seems pretty irrelevant to the overall story.
Yeah. But I mean, as far as the movie itself, I can't recommend it enough. And admittedly, I didn't. I mean, I wasn't writing yet in 2005, so I don't think I watched this movie, for the first time, uh, probably within the last 10 years only. But it wasn't because it was a motorcycle movie. Actually, it was because of Anthony Hopkins.
Right.
He really is my favorite
Sir.
actor. Yes, exactly. It just so happened to be a motorcycle movie, but you know what? Kind of like how The Dark Knight kind of transcended a comic book movie and just became
Mm-hmm.
a great movie. This isn't really just a motorcycle movie, it's just a great movie. And if you haven't seen it yet, I can't recommend it enough. If you've seen it, you're probably like me and you watch it over and over again from time to time again.
Yeah, and I think there's some interesting themes the movie goes across with that I wanted to kind of expound on, was this kind of idea of the American road in general. Unlike most places in the world, the American, the country of America, the North American continent, seems to have been discovered at least by the West. Obviously, those people living here before then, but I mean, discovered through the use of the road. So America expands via the railroad, the international highway system. The idea that one of the greatest American novels, most sold, is Jack Kerouac's On the Road. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, another groundbreaking book from not too far away from this time period, begins its story with a motorcycle road trip. There's something very, very American about the idea of not being at home. America is effectively created as a country through people leaving their home to find home. Jack Kerouac basically starts the road with the idea that he's going to find himself, and he's gonna go. So Burt is already home. He lives home. He's from there. He says the name of his home many times. He's very proud of it. It's the most beautiful city in the world, he says,
Yeah.
on this earth. Yet, where is he the most home is the scene where he's on the Bonneville Salt Flats for the very first time. He's incredibly emotional. He's got watery eyes and a huge so even though he's New Zealand, he's a Kiwi. This Rob has put his cat out of this room like 10 times in the past 5 minutes, and Pearl just keeps walking straight back in. You can't see it, but all I see is this tail
This
walking
tail,
by. It's
like
just
a
a tail.
shark.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
a
he's like baby shark just walking by. Right. Rob is pointing at it, even though you can't see it. So the road in American literature is an extremely important motif. We see this, and I mentioned before, in Easy Rider. One is the most influential motorcycle films, starring Jack Nicholson, Pete Fonda, Dennis Hopper. A movie about finding on yourself on the road. It's kind of a slow movie. At the time, it was groundbreaking. But what do they have? It is very much full of philosophical, waxing poetic mumbo jumbo. Not unlike this episode. Um, so you see, throughout much of American culture, the idea of the road as a means to finding oneself is super common and ingrained into sort of our lexicon of American literature. Um, it was Walt Whitman that coined the term the open road. And the idea that what I really liked about this film was the whole second act. Yeah, we all know the world's fastest Indian. That was kind of what it built to, but I think the second act, the cinematography, the scenes of being on the road, him discovering this new country, discovering he's on the road to find his home, quote unquote, and I think it really, really falls into the larger idea of American cinema. I
Mm.
think this movie's really really underrated and not talked about nearly as much in that sort of like I said lexicon of American films. Specifically films on the idea of the road, or not just films but literature in general. Like I said, talked about Jack Kerouac, we talked about Zen, the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Easy Rider. There's a ton of these films, even Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Most of these films take place, and books,
Yeah.
on roads either in the West or heading west. The West in America, especially the grand expanse of like the far West, because if you look at America, California is not considered the far West; it's considered the coast. But the potential areas like laid out of the American country, the far West is that Nevada, Utah, the large, expansive desert wasteland, where you go to find yourself, so to speak. And I think that was a part of the movie that wasn't talked about a lot, but I think really fits into motorcycling movies as a whole, while still connecting to other movies about the American experience.
You just gave me an idea, Kevin. I think we should do like a BrotoGP on the road waxing poetry about like American roads and culture.
Just like a road trip and just film it, like the
Yeah.
Magic Bus.
Well,
If you
like
guys
a
know what I'm
vlog.
talking, yeah, like a
Almost.
vlog, like a
Yeah.
Dennis vlog.
Exactly. Dennis and Kevin waxing poetry on American back roads.
So speaking of waxing poetic, and as we sort of wind down the talk of the film itself, and maybe get into more esoteric concepts, the initial reason that I wanted to do this episode, we talked about this episode like a year ago, and then we didn't get around to it for a
Hmm.
variety of reasons. But one of the things that really popped this back up in my head, I wanted to do this episode, was recently famed, speaking of like American literature and film and all that, famed filmmakers Scorsese and then later Francis Ford Coppola kind of go on record as despising Marvel movies, the Marvel Rob's laughing, but I'm not sure why. Just sort of despising the idea of Marvel and the franchisement of film. They said that Marvel movies are like a theme park. They're not film. They're not art. And I'm not necessarily saying I agree, but what I do agree with is the transition of the industry from stories to franchises, from the idea like this just came out that if you don't follow Disney Plus you won't understand phase 4 of the MCU. So now
Huh.
it's we everything is interconnected to the point that we're just creating products that feed products that feed products. Directors have less directors have less ability to express themselves. There's a like an overseer from the comic book realm of Marvel that's saying it must follow this, this, and this. You can't do this. And directors are simply nothing but a cog in the machine of creating this product. And Scorsese holds no bones about it. And it was making me think of what people are saying, like on the BrotoGP Army page and some of our context about how Americans go over it, because we're getting some Americans in the world stage. Garrett Gerloff's going back. Um, who's the kid that's going to go do Moto 2 just now? Yeah, what Sean Dillon Kelly.
Oh, right. Yeah,
Yeah, Rob. Yeah.
for Eco
But the question is,
Locomotive.
how do we get more Americans? And what do we always say? You can't if you don't sell the farm and head out when they're young, if they're not within that system already. And I come from the time when I remember Nicky Hayden winning races in AMA Supersport out of the back of a box truck. You know what I mean? And then cheating, getting caught cheating, like literally cheating, like flat breaking the rules. But what's he going to do, man? He's working out of a box truck. He's winning races, right? He's proven it can be done. This idea that used to be that racing was men and women out of their garage, making it happen, put it together, who are out there for the thrill of it. And it feels like it's becoming so commoditized. And we've said this about Marquez's celebrations and all that. And it's not just Marquez, it's the whole system, right? Like you have the VR46 Academy, whose only plan is to get Italians in it. You have, all these cups. Everyone is closely monitored, what they can and can't say, what they can and can't do. It feels like it's produced. It's a product now, as opposed to an experience, as opposed to a story and art. And for me, Burt Munro, and not only is this movie a movie that probably wouldn't get made now, or a movie that would have such a hard time getting made at all, even in 2005, that now it would maybe get released. It would be like straight to Netflix or something, and only because
Yeah.
Netflix is just spamming money, and it would be not nearly as good because their quality control is horrible.
I
One
don't
of
know
those
if the
Netflix
movie can be made now, but or nor would it even have an audience nowadays.
right, or the audience is, yeah, people wouldn't even know that the audience is there, that people are yearning for this kind of product. And Burt Munro, to me, and the movie itself, it's like a dyad. Both of them represent, the film and the man, a dying breed that we kind of are really holding on to, thinking like, please don't go, but it's already gone. You can't enter international racing anymore. The idea that you could flout procedures and flout the rules is, unless you buy it off, is you know what I mean, is
Yeah.
completely. I mean, we're even talking about that, like the Petronas Yamaha team basically exists on the excess funding from the Petronas F1 team, right? Like, because just there's certain caps, and the money just comes from the fact that the Petronas F1 team has to make sure they don't spend a certain amount of money and not get penalized. And I really wanted to talk about this movie and go back and revisit it and really tell like our followers and all that to revisit it, because what you see in this film is, it's genuine. The film itself is genuine. All of the characters are genuine. The message of the film is genuine, and all it really is loving it for the process itself.
Yeah.
He's not sponsored. There's no sponsors. He didn't even care. Hey man, I'm just here to do the run. This is all I want to do, is do the run. This is why I'm here. He's not. It's his glory is the act itself,
Right.
not the accolades or prestige afterwards. And they do this because what does he do when he breaks the record? He calls a little kid collect
Hmm.
and says, "I did it." He doesn't. He's not being interviewed by movies. They don't show him on a podium. He's not being. His adulation is intimately personal. His adulation is the respect of his friend,
Hmm.
not the adoring fans, not the nameless audience. And in a time of day when like your biggest supporters are probably someone you don't know, and your biggest haters are probably someone you do know, thanks to social media and interconnectedness, the idea that the most important person it was to tell was the little kid that lives next door, and then his dad finding out was, I don't know, man. That was what kicked off the movie for me, and really made me want to talk about this movie one more time.
Yeah. And I appreciate hearing that actually because I mean, like I said, I've seen it so many times, but just listening to you dissect some scenes or sequences, I'm like, ah, I never really thought of it that way, but it's true.
Yeah, in the end, the movie is about the triumph of the little guy or the everyman over like the crushing weight
Yeah.
of the bureaucracy of civilization of all of that. And
And for me, it's
looking at
also about the purity of passion, for better or worse.
the pure, I think even it is yeah, you're right, that really is the theme of the movie, the purity of passion, for better or worse. Just for me, 2019, I go back, and that's what I thought when I saw this film in the theaters. A bunch of my friends, we were riding, we all rode our bikes to see it. We went to the indie theater, and that's what it was, the purity of passion. It was like validation that being like an early 20s dumbass riding around on his motorcycle, like, see, like, it's
So you
about
might be you might be able to accomplish something close
right.
to what
But
he did.
but I go back and look at it now. I'm 38. It's been, it's 14, 15 years since it was created, and I think,
Yeah.
wow, man, now it's funny to see the new angle that I didn't see it from originally
Yeah.
after some time away, which was, a lot of us wish we could do this stuff and just get out from under that for
Hmm.
just a minute, just
Yeah.
one trip. Why does everyone want to get away when things go bad? They want to travel, they want to go find themselves, and that's really what the movie's about. And I can't recommend this movie enough for everyone. And like I said, it's on Amazon Prime. I'm sure you can buy the DVD for like $1.
Yeah. Pretty
You
much.
probably find it in like one of those weird 7-Eleven bins for like $3. You can get yourself, two Monterey Jack taquitos, a Slurpee, and a World Fascinating. But I can't. Of all the motorcycle movies, and maybe we'll do more of these or talk more, or maybe I'll do some monologues. This would be the one I would start with for
Yeah.
genuine film. This and then Biker Boys. Right. So that being said, guys, thanks for joining us on this kind of off the wall topic. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to do more of this stuff. Thanks to Writers Law for supporting us always. Writers Law with a Z.com, personal accident injury lawyers. Thanks for Rob for taking his random time out of his Sunday night to hear me talk about a movie that he probably hasn't seen in 10 years. And thanks everyone here for listening. Dennis, any parting thoughts?
No, watch the movie. Come back, let
Watch
us
the
know what you
movie.
think, obviously.
Yeah, let us know what you think in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe. I know it's super cliche, but it's kind of important. We're trying to do this stuff without monetizing everything and creating, the product that we're rallying against on most of our episodes. So any help is help. Um,
Yeah.
and with that, see you next time.